Let me ask you this, because you've been in this industry many, many years, and I love what you said, because you mentioned this in the book. It is about, those private access, those exclusivity, kind of environments where not everybody's able to get access to. And like you mentioned in the book as well, and you mentioned in other pieces of content you talk about, where the high, ultra high net worth individuals, right? They think about different. It's more status, right? But I want to ask, before we dive into that, it's more of, Salvatore, at what point in your journey did you understand the impact of network? But then not only the impact of network, but also how did you navigate it to be able to get into those big arenas, to be able to network with those exclusive individuals and the partners that you have now?
Probably the most, and I talk about this in my book, Investing Legacy, how the 0.001% invest. And I think the biggest lesson I've ever had was that my grandfather, Thomas Danger, was a hotelier, and he was very, I learned a lot from him, right? We would always go out to, Sunday, lunch, or, after church, we'd go out to breakfast with him, and he would impart his principles. And really, he was always saying that your network is the most important thing in your reputation. And I took this to heart because when I was in school, in college in New York City, I was kind of miserable because I was pre-med at the time. I was biology and chemistry. I was a rower on the team too, so I was pretty busy, but it was hard because between junior and senior year, I read a book called Confessions of a Medical Heretic. Now, this was back in 1992 I'm talking about. The book was written in 1977. And that sort of formulated into me it sort of made me kind of anxious as to where I was going to go. And I was working with this doctor at the time who was a famous orthopedic surgeon for the Knicks, and I would go down over to Beth Israel Hospital, where there was a total knee reconstructive surgery center. And I passed out holding a fibula about a couple of months in the cadaver room. And I said to myself, I'm not really doing this for the right reasons. I'm not really into it. And it made senior year kind of hard for me. So I went through the motions and I continued with the internship, only doing research, right? So I was doing a lot of library work and not really doing too much in the ER, although I was participating and watching these guys with hammers just whack knees, and it was making me sick to my stomach. And after I graduated, the doctor I worked for, he knew something was up, and me being younger at the time, just graduated, I didn't have the heart to tell him that I didn't want to go to medical school, because this guy had championed me. He had the perfect life of something that I would aspire to have that nobody has today unless you're in plastics. And that is, he had the Aston Martin, a beautiful wife, a house in the same building as Gloria Vanderbilt on the Upper East Side, and all of this stuff. And he was really championing me hard. And I basically had an hour-long conversation with him one day, and I remember it was when the first cell phones came out. I'm on the corner of the street on East 10th Street, and I'm talking to him, and he's like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. And it was an hour-long conversation, and he finally said, you know what, Sal, I agree with you. You're a hard worker. By the way, my brother just made partner at Goldman Sachs. I think you should talk to him. And at that point, that's how the reputation and the network started to grow. And that was probably the most important lesson of my life, because at that point, it was really what people thought of you. And so many, like your work ethic and your character and everything. And that's really gotten me kind of far, especially when I was trying to raise money at the age of 29, which is kind of young. I was able to get $30 million from a Park Avenue investment manager because I was the only one that said, hey, we have to short the housing market. Here's how we're going to do it. And we basically became the kitchen sink for Bear Stearns, and then I replicated that same thing in the western United States, in Las Vegas and Southern California, where there was a lot of commercial distress. And if it comes down to that, it's really the network. And a lot of people don't put a lot of time into building relationships. Like you and I were shooting the breeze before this, and we always do. It's like, yeah, Miami's a great life. I live down here. You can tell by the chandelier in the background. I love it. It has a different vibe here. It's not like New York at all. It's almost like a 24/7 city. But the network here is just incredible, because I came here and I moved here specifically to build relationships. Build relationships that weren't in New York that I had already, but to rebuild new relationships down here, because Miami's really become sort of like the melting pot recently. There's people who have displaced themselves from California to move out here. There's a tremendous amount of wealth and affluence, but there's also a lot of smart people here too who are more aligned with what we're doing, and that book is sort of like the dog whistle for them. So when I go to Palm Beach, I hand that out like cookies. People read it, they get back to me. And it sort of formulates building a community, because that's what people want today, is that interactivity. And you're on my email list, so you see my emails, you see everything that goes out, you see pictures from like the black tie galas. That interactivity people like. People want that communication. And I go out of my way, and I've made this clear with my partners, and they love it, is that we interview the CEOs. You know, some of these guys like to do it the old school way in the 90s where they, you know, send out these huge letters. And I used to send out these huge investment letters, Christian, but nobody would read them. And then I recorded it on video, and then people were like, it's boring. So now I'm like, we got to turn this into a way where we get people's attention, because that's really the most valuable thing today. Is getting people's attention. As a professional podcaster, you know that, right? And when you're able to do that, it works really, really well. And that's what we're trying to do, is just to keep the attention of all of our member families so that they understand this is what we're working on. There's always going to be good things. There's going to be some bad things. We haven't had any bad things, thankfully, you know, knock on wood. But we tell people why we haven't had any bad things. And we're very clear with that. And we do a lot of repetition and refrains that we only invest in world-class companies with pedigreed operators or sponsors or founders or CEOs who've been through this before, not first-time people who are looking, you know, for an opportunity on Shark Tank. And, you know, not to go too much further on it, but if you look at Shark Tank, that's a great show as far as like the microcosm of like venture investing or private investing in America today. It's people don't have the network; they have an idea, so they go groveling on national TV for $300,000. Does that make sense?
It does, and I see the power of it that has evolved over and over and over. You've seen in every deal that you guys have done, you know, at Dandrew Partners, it has been through your network and your ecosystem that you have established and the relationships you've built. And you go very heavily in your book, which actually I want to kind of pivot a little bit.